how the debt ceiling debate is a secret attack. Now, if you know anything about the global Game of Thrones, you know that it's not just the United States on its own. You hear about the rise of BRICS. You hear about the war with Russia and China. And there's multiple interests and there's multiple factions around the world. And if you understand that, it makes everything else more clear, like the debt ceiling debate in the United States. Is it really about Republicans and Democrats? Could it be that maybe they don't want to get this resolved? Is it possible that this is an attack on the United States? Well, that's the topic of conversation with returning guest Tom Luongo. This is part 2 of a 2-part conversation. If you haven't seen part 1, you should. We'll link to it in the show notes down below. But we are going to discuss this debt ceiling debate. We're going to discuss something called the Chevron doctrine. We're going to talk about how potentially you should be checking your bias at the door and look at this from an adversarial lens so you can understand what happens with this debt ceiling debate. Regardless of the outcome, it's pushing it towards a goal. We're going to then talk about the warring factions in the United States when it comes to capital controls, the crackdown on cryptocurrencies, the crackdown on technology, why they're doing it, and then, of course, most importantly, what we can be doing about it. Again, this is an amazing conversation with Tom Luongo, returning guest to the show. It's a 2-part episode. Part 1 is linked down below. Let's just jump right into it. So I want to talk about, that's a super interesting conversation, so I have that on my points here, but zooming back up just a little bit. Sure. So kind of with this view, with this view as we're diving into this, you start to see why we're having this banking crisis because of fighting the battle and its collateral damage, the chemotherapy to the body, et cetera. And then it starts to frame up this debt ceiling debate and what potentially happens with this debt ceiling debate based off of this information that we have. I want to talk about these Biden appointees that I tweeted you about or DM'd you about it, et cetera. But before we jump down into that, if we think about it from that lens of these players that potentially are kind of at the table that are getting tapered, I don't know if you follow Whitney Webb at all. She's an amazing researcher, writer. I did an interview with her recently, and she talks about like everything that we see from the culture wars that we're having in the United States, the transitioning of the children to Russia, China, Taiwan. All that's a distraction to ultimately get to the end goal. And so what is that? So just last week, Putin, again, made another speech that he's done many times, which is the globalists of the West want to destroy the family unit, and they want to transition your kids, and we stand up for traditional Christian values and blah, 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 right? So it's this attack, which I think you would probably agree, is Putin kind of is standing up to the globalists, right? So
Absolutely.
There's this kind of a war. So you look at that, and right, so we agree, but... And China probably doesn't agree with the globalists either, right? So they're on the other side. But at the same time, they're all rushing us into this digital panopticon. So China obviously is way ahead with their social credit score system and movement, CBDCs, et cetera. Of course, Russia's working on a CBDC as well. And so while it looks like these warring factions, if you go back to that chart I had showed earlier at the top, if you put the BIS up there, what do they really want? Well, they want us with digital, passports to control our movements, central bank digital currencies to control our transactions. And whether you see Russia, China, Taiwan, the U.S., whatever, like all roads lead to that.
Well, they do because they understand at a certain level. Well, I'll be honest with you. You don't think that they're rushing to that because of Bitcoin? Let's ask the basic question of all Bitcoiners, which is that Bitcoin fixes all of these things. It's superior technology, and they need to have a version of it that works for them. We are moving into a world where we need plumbing that is faster than the old T+3 settlement system and the old massively inefficient settlement system for trade, the old ledger system.
I think it's bigger than that, though. It's not just we need to be able to move money faster. It's total censorship of movement, censorship of communication, censorship of money transactions. And so it's the product. It's the age-old situation from ancient Rome to the Protestant Reformation, which is we have to control the information, the narrative.
Of course.
And so it's I want to get to the Restrict Act in the United States again, another thing, but it's restricting all movement and communication.
Mark, we're moving into an authoritarian age. We're moving. There's no argument And authoritarian systems don't last. I'm not going to sit here and argue, but Putin's version of the fourth industrial revolution looks nothing like Klaus Schwab's.
Okay.
Neither does, this is the thing, they may use the same terminology. Matt Ehret and I did a whole podcast the last time he was on my show. We did a whole podcast, and not just him, but Joaquin Flores. I talked with Joaquin Flores as well about this stuff. He's like, look, they use, it was actually Flores, it wasn't Matt, they may use the same terminology. I did this when I was on the debate with Whitney. Whitney invited me to a thing last February, and it was me and Matt Ehret versus Riley Wagaman and Ian Davis, and hosted by Kit Knightley over at Off Guardian, and we had a great time. And I just went off. I'm like, no, because the whole
I'll have to look that up.
The whole premise was, is Putin a WEF agent? And I literally laughed in their face.
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, it's not happening. Why are the Russians still buying gold if they want to do this?
Hey, I just want to stop for a second and say I hope that you're enjoying this interview. We're starting at a very high lens, and we're going to drill down, because if you get the big picture correctly, it helps you identify what's going on. When you understand where the storm is brewing and where it's sending the money, it's very easy to figure out where to put your investments. And so I'm going to have a special presentation next week that I'd like to bring your attention to and invite you to, where I'm going to talk about the banking collapse and the debt ceiling debate, what's really going on, what we should expect from that, and most importantly, how we position ourselves to protect our own investments as well as profit from this as it all happens. So people that aren't paying attention, unfortunately, they get hammered. But for those of us that are prepared, we can protect ourselves, and more importantly, we can take advantage of these situations. So join me next week. I'm going to do this offline. It's going to be about an hour presentation. I'm going to run through the slides, and I'm going to take all your questions and answers live. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm doing with my own money, the positions, the assets, the categories, and like I said, I'll answer all your questions live. You can sign up for free. Down below, there's a link. If you'd like to come hang out with me, I do these every couple of months when there's something big like this, and the banking crisis, the debt crisis is one of those. So come join me. Check out the link down below. And now let's go ahead and just jump right back into the interview with Tom. So then you're saying, of course, everybody wants us in a authoritarian digital panopticon, but they all want their own version. Sure. It's not that they're all a distraction to get us to the BIS's ultimate one, but rather they all want their own. They all necessarily, remember, I do really want you to understand that systems and civilizations are different things, right? And Russia's a civilizational power. China's a civilizational power. Iran, civilizational power. The West, not a civilizational power. We are a systems power. We believe that our system is our civilization. And that is the ideological difference. I look at Russia pushing towards these things, and China in many ways pushing towards these things. I see them more as immune system responses to external threats. The threat being coming from the systemization and the push to systematize the entire world. And they're going to have some, they talk about this. Putin, for in many ways, is affected by Alexander Dugin. Not as much as the West would like us to believe, but I do believe that Putin believes in using using state capitalism, for lack of a better term, and it's a really imprecise term, using state capitalism as a way to defend themselves against external aggression. Sergei Lazarev thinks the same thing. I also happen to think he's just another Keynesian when you really drill down into what Lazarev believes. But this is real, right? That they understand that if they don't have digital cross-border settlement of trade in some way, manner, shape, or form, they will not be able to compete with what's happening in the West. Okay? They won't. And it's why they've done what they've done. We view it from the outside as, oh my God, they're sinking into authoritarian fascism or whatever ism you want to throw on top of it. That's fine. But their civilization is that Russia is Russia, and that Putinism and Xiism in China is what they need to survive what they know is coming and was already attacking them. Okay? And that they'll be more than willing to get rid of Putinism or get rid of Xiism when it suits their purpose. And they will.
I've been arguing for a long time, for example, that I don't think the CCP in China is a particularly stable organization. I look at the situation as it exists right now, and I say, okay, let's think about Agenda 2030. Let's think about Martin Armstrong's, peak into 2032, right? Let's posit that these things are real, or that's where this, in that time frame, is when this whole thing comes to a head, and China is going to become the destination for global capital after the West collapses. Now let's ask the question: how does that happen? Does it happen with an authoritarian CCP and a closed capital account?
But the closed capital account is.
I know the CCP would like that, but does China want that? Because China and the CCP are different things, right. And so global capital may enforce on the Chinese. I've said this many times. I'm like, how do they get there? They have to treat capital better than everybody else does, because capital flows
they're not going to want to do
fast.
that.
No, but what if the CCP collapses and China goes through a quote-unquote revolution, real democratic revolution? What if they overthrow the Xiist system, and that's what actually allows for all of this flow, that flow of capital to really finish from going from east to west? And if you look at what they're building through the BRICS, through the EAU and the BRICS and the SEO and all of this stuff, all of these institutions, these parallel institutions, Asian Development Bank, Asia Infrastructure, International Infrastructure Bank, the BRICS Bank, this, that, and everything else. You look at all these, they all look like the IMF, the World Bank, they're building parallel systems, but they're also, they don't trust each other in any way, manner, shape, or form. You think the Indians and the Chinese trust each other? No. You think the Iranians ultimately trust the Chinese? No. Do you think the Iranians ultimately trust the Russians? No. Do you think the Russians trust the Indians or the Brazilians? No, they don't. They're going to need a trusted asset.
They're going to need
them all together, and they're going to standardize on gold. I have an unpublished podcast I did yesterday with Vince Lanci, BBL, and we discussed this for an hour and a half. And I'm going to put it out when I get an hour, maybe after I get done with this, probably tomorrow morning. So it'll be out before the end of the weekend. And we discuss all of this and the nuts and bolts and the mechanisms of this. So you can see what they're doing. They're going to go to gold first, and that's going to force the West to go to gold. And
you still end up with the distrust of all these nations, and so the problem with gold is it requires trust of the custodian or who controls the ledger, so to speak, right?
They're not going to be shipping gold. You're thinking too far ahead, Mark. You're thinking way too far ahead. A digital gold settlement system is another metastable situation, but it'll last long enough for them to build trust amongst each other, and then when they betray each other, then they're going to have to do something. Then they're going to have to come up with something else.
But who will control
the ledger? It's not going to be a stable system, but it's going to be more stable, and it's going to enforce discipline. And look, it's an order of operations. First, you got to get rid of the bullshit credit money and the fiat money and the debt-based assets. Then you got to move to some form of digitized bearer asset and trade settlement asset based on a basket of currencies, commodities, and whatnot. And then you can start thinking about, is this good enough? It may be good enough for a long, long time. But you may also be thinking, I may also be thinking here about the next cycle of history. It may be good enough for 80 years. It may be good for 10 years, 20 years, 80 years, but it's going to be enough. Because that's the way you win this conflict. You can't think of it as I need to win the war. You need to think about this as a battle.
Sure, it's a game. I mean, it's a game. You're thinking moves, maybe a couple moves ahead, so to speak. And so, to your point, I mean, we can easily see that fiat currencies are dying easily, and the banking system in which the fiat currencies are being created through are also dying. And so, really, there's going to be a return to this commodity type of money. I mean, that's kind of where we're already kind of going.
And ultimately, just some kind of trust built back into the system. And look, what is the Federal Reserve trying to do? My argument is very simple. They're trying to get back to having the trust of the people and to build trust domestically in the banking system. So, SOFR.
I guess the point that I'm kind of stuck on is, to your point, none of these countries trust each other. And you just mentioned, with China, they don't have open capital accounts. So who's going to give, and with the CCP, who's going to give their money to China at this point, and et cetera. So nobody trusts that. And so who has the gold? Who has the gold?
Well, no. Each of the sovereign banks, central banks, have a gold, but you have basically a digital claim system. that balances all the trade imbalances at the end of the quarter, and they just settle up. And they have a digital ledger of everybody's central bank balances. And
right,
why is everybody buying gold? In order to have enough capital to be able to buy into that system. And they don't. And the gold is never going to change hands. Understand? But if anybody cheats, then they're going to have. Then you know what they'll do? They'll go, well, then if you're cheating, then I'm going to, like we did with Bretton Woods, then we're just going to not give you the gold. We're going to repudiate your claims against our gold reserves, and that's a powerful trust mechanism. Let's just play this out over the course of a couple of years. And Russia's a trade surplus country, and they have claims against a few tons worth of Indian gold and I don't know, Indonesian gold and blah blah blah, whatever. I'm picking some numbers.
Yeah.
And then and the Russians then cheat, right?
Or India cheats and said they don't have the gold they said they did. Now they can't pay the bill.
That's fine. They can do that as well. But if that happens, then the Russians go, oh, fine. Well, you owe me money, and now we're going to do X, Y, and Z. If they'll have moves. Why do you think Russia is trying to stitch the entire Asian continent together with pipelines and build BOT contracts for nuclear power plants through Rosatom and all of these countries? Why do you think they're doing that? So that that you build up trust through doing business with each other and treating each other well. Trust is the thing you build up over time.
Yep.
And then so you build up the trade, then you build a settlement system that is an immune system against the hyper financialization of the West, and then you hope that system is good enough, and that everybody and that system is going to last for however long it lasts, and this was why Putin worked so hard to get Europe on his side for years. It's his biggest strategic mistake, was thinking that the Europeans were honest brokers. I've said this many times. Putin being stationed in West Germany when he was a young KGB officer is his biggest fault as a leader, because he has a soft spot for the Germans. And he always thought that if I just build up enough trade between us and the Germans, then the Germans will not go to war against us effectively. And guess what?
He might have underestimated how bad people wanted to keep Germany and Russia apart, right? In the geopolitical Game of Thrones, that was always the goal, because you can't have a leading exporter of commodities and a leading producer of goods in Germany getting together.
Right. This is old Bismarckian, Mackinder style, analysis. Absolutely. Yeah. And that hasn't changed. And do you think a word of that has filtered? Do you think any of that has changed in the foreign policy establishments within the British aristocracy? Do you think any of that's changed? It hasn't changed in the think tanks on K Street in Washington. It hasn't changed at all in the British Foreign Office at all, or MI6 or anywhere else. Like, they're running the same script: no Germany and Russia hookup. You're exactly right when you say that. Did he underestimate it? I think he did, and I think it's got him involved in a quagmire in Ukraine, which he's nominally winning. But I put really big air quotes around that, because clearly what's happening now with the Biden administration and with the British, and with help from Davos, who are basically sitting there going, no, don't fight, but here's some money. No, don't fight, but more sanctions. No, don't fight. Like, it's nonsense. Like, you listen to Ursula von der Leyen talk, you listen to Charles Michel and Joseph Borrell and all these people that run EU policy, and they're all in favor of the war against Russia. Macron's standing there and going, maybe we should think about peace. Guess what? That's the counter thing that they always have somebody do that every once in a while he tries to make some deals with China, because China is now becoming an active player in this situation. Like, they're all over this conflict, trying to tip the scale towards a settlement. And then, because clearly the Chinese understand that they're not talking to the British, by the way, you'll notice. They're not talking to the Americans, by the way, you'll notice. But they are trying to work with the EU. So why? Because the EU is the weak man at the table. Why? Because, but most of the Davos lieutenants are still trying to start a war with China. And then
even though Europe's kind of getting demolished from this. I mean, Germany being the economic engine of Europe, without Germany, I mean, Europe doesn't really stand much of a chance. And now you have some of the largest companies in Germany. I mean, it's deindustrializing. You have like BASF leaving Germany and going to China. So China seems to be the beneficiary of this, and it's weakening Davos or Europe at the same time.
Right, and then you have the Fed refusing to back off. Powell just met with the members of the PBOC. Did you hear that? Was that mentioned or amplified on Bloomberg at all?
I didn't hear that. No.
No, he did about a month ago. The last one. So the last time the American and then Jamie Dimon went to China this week. Because the bridges still need to be left open, because it's clear that the Biden administration wants war with China or expansion of the war in Ukraine with Russia. But which makes no sense. Going back to what we had talked about earlier, it makes perfect sense.
We don't have
Davos aligned. They want to destroy the United States.
Right, because we don't have the balance sheet, nor do we have the manufacturing base to fight both of those wars, and so attempting to do that will only bring destruction.
So therefore, why are we pursuing that policy? It's not stupidity, folks. It's a policy. And when it's a policy that's so freaking discordant and anathema to common sense, it's not dumb. It's a feature, not a bug.
Although some of the stuff that the Biden administration has done, like taking chips away from China, well, I guess that's part of the war, right? So that's the war on China. Hey, Tom, I know we've gone just over an hour. I wanted to talk about this debt ceiling debate, which is where I originally got going, and potentially these capital controls at this stage. When you look at what the Biden administration has done with the CHIPS Act, that's actually an act of war, which actually seems to potentially, started with Trump under the tariff wars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is.
Right?
I mean,
that was the beginning of the trade war.
I like the debt ceiling thing is very, very important, because look, what I'm arguing here is that there's a split at the top of the U.S. political hierarchy, right? Davos exerts its control through the agencies, through the Chevron doctrine, right? The agency, they control the agency, they control the EPA because they have control of the government. They have control of Biden.
The administrative state.
They control the administrative state. Now the Supreme Court has, interestingly enough, agreed to review the Chevron doctrine, which gives the administrative state, the administrative heads, all the departments, basically legislative power. Because, if they say X, then, and Congress hasn't passed the law, well, then that becomes law. Right? This is a very Davos thing to do. Like, the Chevron doctrine is kind of the heart of Davos's real power within the United States. Now, there's counter-revolutionary point number one. Powell still raising interest rates, doing QT, counter-revolution number two. You have a thin majority in Congress on the side of the fiscal conservatives, not in the Senate, but in Congress. So for once, we actually have a GOP where the fiscal conservatives exert all the political control. When Gingrich tried to rein all this stuff in back in the 90s, he had a 50-seat majority. You have 20 fiscal conservatives. They have no vote. The globalists can run roughshod over, and they did. They killed Gingrich. They beat him. Today, McCarthy doesn't have that. McCarthy has 4 seats in the House. And he's got 14 to 20 hardcore fiscal conservatives. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, Thomas Massey, and one other. He loses those 5. He's no longer Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
Okay? So even if he is a Davos troll, even if he is a globalist, even if he is, a shitbag Californian, for lack of a better term, that's why he had to pass that. And even then, what they passed the House, Matt Gaetz wasn't happy with. Right. And good for him. So if it gets neutered at all in the Senate, and so now you have in the Senate, you've got Joe Manchin saying, no more spending. You've got Kirsten Sinema, left the Democratic Party. So really, on all of the key issues, the fiscal conservatives are in control of the Senate, except that you also have Collins, Murkowski, and Romney. So now you got to come up with 3 other senators on the Democrat side to counter the 3 rhinos.
All right, I want to take just another quick break, real quick, because I know you're hearing all this information and hopefully it's fascinating and interesting. But what do you do with it? Knowledge isn't power. Only actionable knowledge is power. So what do you do with this to protect your investments and grow your investments? And so I'm going to have a presentation next week. We're going to break this down. I'm going to run through a whole presentation to show you what's going on and more specifically what asset classes I think are the best ones to get into and what I'm doing with my own money. And then I do live Q&A where I'll answer all of your questions live for everybody so we can all learn together. We can all work together as a community. It's a free event. I do these every couple of months when there's something big. You can check it out. You can sign up down below. There's a link. Like I said, this is interesting, but what do you do with it? That's what we're going to discuss, what I'm doing with it and what you can do as well. Sign up down below for free. I hope to see you there. And now let's go ahead and just jump right back in with Tom. And not lose any, which we see the Democrats are actively trying to recruit some of the Republicans to come over. So
Sure. So this debt ceiling fight is not about whether they're going to raise the debt ceiling. They're going to raise the debt ceiling. The question is, how does the debt ceiling get raised? Does it get raised with $4.8 trillion worth of spending cuts over 10 years? Does it get passed with $1 trillion over 10 years? Does it get passed clean? If it gets passed clean, it's a clean win for Davos, Janet Yellen, and Joe Biden. And you know that any what I would call counter-revolutionary forces still don't have enough power on the Hill. Right? But if it passes in its current form, or Biden is forced to veto it in its current form, and then I guess it goes back to do reconciliation, and then they start playing another round of games. Moreover, Janet Yellen is lying through her teeth, Mark, about us running out of money. Go look at the 8.4.1 report from the Fed. I'm going to pull up the latest one while we're sitting here talking, because as of last week, there was over $400 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries that were going to roll off the Fed's balance sheet over the next 90 days. There's $103 billion that are going to mature within the next 15 days. And there's another $287 billion that are going to roll off in the next 16 to 90 days. So there's almost $400 billion worth of debt issuance that Yellen can issue short-term treasuries on in order to not breach the debt ceiling, because the Fed is going to retire those.
So they're running out of money in the TGA, in the Treasury account. But to your point, since there's debt rolling off, they could add new debt without breaching the ceiling. So they are running out of money, and we can track how much they have money left. We can track their burn rate. Right,
and it's right there. And what did we have last week? I think it was something like $43 billion in spending last week. It dropped by the Treasury's account.
It was like $30 billion in spending with like $2.4 billion in income or something like that.
Something like that. Whatever it was, it still doesn't matter. Like they can come up with the money if they need to, right? So they've got the balance sheet room, and she can do some emergency stuff, and they can cut spending. They can close parts of the government down. Yellen doesn't want to do that. Yellen has been screaming since November, there's going to be a default, there's going to be a default, there's going to be a default. Why? Because she's trying to engineer a default. That's why.
Right. And that was what I had originally DM'd you about and asking if you thought that might be part of the plan. Like maybe, because we all run around with this bias that like they want to fix things and they want things to be better and they want to reach a deal. So we run around with that bias, but that's why I wanted to talk to you, because when we zoom out and look at this geopolitical Game of Thrones, maybe they don't want to save it, and maybe engineering a default might actually be what some people would want.
Who benefits from that?
Well, Davos would benefit from that.
Of course. Why? And here's the big reason why. Because now the United States would be politically paralyzed, would have no money to spend, would have defaulted on their debt, which would ruin our credit rating. And what does global capital do? It's frozen in place. Where should it go? Meanwhile, we're finally starting to get whispers on FinTwit you know, the European banks are in trouble. You don't say. I mean, look at which banks in the United States were destroyed. They were all oligarch San Francisco banks, California banks that made billion-dollar loans to Mark Zuckerberg against his Facebook stock at 100 basis points, so that that bank could do business with Facebook and in other areas. They gave him a sweetheart loan at 100 basis points. Like those are the banks that blew up. They were oligarch banks. Okay, these were banks that the Fed wants to get rid of. This is why I can make the argument. This is why that going back to Deep Throat's article, I'm like, I can make equally plausible arguments that Davos blew up Silicon Valley Bank in order to try and engineer a banking crisis into the debt ceiling talks. They had motive, means, and opportunity. I can make the argument that the Fed wanted to that's what I argue, the Fed wanted to get rid of it, to get rid of Silicon Valley Bank in order to kill so much of the stablecoin market, because there were all these other things going on. And they wanted to get rid of these San Francisco banks because the New York Fed, because San Francisco Bank is under-regulating their banks. This goes all the way back to when Janet Yellen ran the San Francisco Fed, and her disciples run it today. Remember, each of the 12 member central banks of the Federal Reserve are run differently. They're their own fiefdoms. Okay?
I could also argue that the banks went down as collateral damage to the Fed tightening the Ponzi.
Right. I think that is the proximate cause, and then everybody decides who piled on. Right?
So leading to $100 billion worth of withdrawals happening in a single day.
Sure. And you can make any money, again, who pulled their money out of Silicon Valley Bank or First Republic Bank? Well, clearly in First Republic Bank, it wasn't JP Morgan, because JP Morgan immediately threw $5 billion into the kitty. But guess who didn't get to buy First Republic Bank, even though they wanted it?
Who?
Well, PNC made a bid that weekend, backed by Apollo Group and BlackRock. That's who. And guess who bought it? JP Morgan. So a major San Francisco oligarch bank, Silicon Valley, California bank, that are literally the laughingstock of the banking industry, general banking industry in the United States, is now no longer controlled by the San Francisco Fed. It's controlled by the New York Fed and JP Morgan.
And anyone who pays halfway attention to anything knows that, unfortunately, in California, Gavin Newsom and the state of California is trying to lead the charge for the entire United States into the Davos agenda. Right. So
in the same week, we see California say that they're 18 billion. They're going to default on $18 billion worth of debt, and yet they want to or they're going to default on some amount of debt, and yet they want to do reparations.
Yeah, $18 billion.
In the same week, they did this. All right, we're going to spend
state
money
that
we don't have. We're going to default on the bondholders, and yet we're going to pay reparations.
We went from a $100 billion surplus to a $25 billion deficit in 10 months. $25 billion is set aside for illegal aliens, which is part of this DREAM Act, which is constitutionally illegal, which is put it into the deficit. Now, to your point, they want to give this reparations, and they're defaulting on this $18 billion. I mean, and that is the model for the U.S., and Gavin Newsom very likely could be a president in the very near future.
And what you see in California is what they're always planning on what they're going to do in the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the New York banks, Wall Street is still Wall Street, the Hamptons still matter, and they're like, you know what? No. You know what? No. That's enough. And now I can go into what I wrote in an article that I published last week about BlackRock and they're wanting to become a CFI and all of this other stuff. And it's very clear to me that
BlackRock did get they did get tapped by the Fed to help them get rid of this, $118 billion worth of bank assets.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I mean, look, BlackRock is important, right? But at the same time, BlackRock's balance sheet rests on very little shareholder equity.
Right.
It's like $38 billion. It ain't shit. It's nothing compared to what they own.
Yeah.
Right? Look, the thing is, the way I argue this, I put some pieces together and I say to myself, for years, BlackRock said, I don't want to be a CFI. We don't use leverage. We're not a bank, blah, 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 blah. Remember when Goldman was made a bank holding company by Bernanke back during the financial crisis? Remember, Goldman Sachs was a private investment bank, and then they became a bank holding company so that they could get access to the Fed during the financial crisis, right? Well, I think BlackRock is playing the same game. I think that they want to become a CFI now after having built themselves up into this massive political entity that votes our proxy for $9 trillion worth of equity or $8.8 trillion worth of AUM to, destroy Coca-Cola, destroy Bud Light, destroy this company, destroy that company, blah, 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 with all this ESG, DEI, Exxon, all this ESG, DEI nonsense. And then now that they get into trouble, now Yellen is saying, oh, well, maybe they need to be a CFI. Huh. They haven't, they've been fighting that for 10 years, and now all of a sudden they want to do it. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if Apollo and BlackRock were behind the PNC bid to buy First Republic Bank, then that was clearly a means by which to legitimize the idea that BlackRock was a CFI because now they own a bank. Because now they own First Republic. So JP Morgan stepped in and said, no, you don't get to be a bank. And no, you don't get to be a CFI either because we're going to kill you. That's what I'm seeing. Because
so if we go back, if we go back to this debt ceiling piece, then for a minute, I think we kind of, I guess the banking crisis and the debt ceiling kind of tie in together. I guess if you're zooming out far enough, right? Mm-hmm. But I think if you look at it from if you get rid of your bias where you believe that they want to save everything and maybe they don't, maybe there's an adversarial lens here,
right?
And so potentially, if you would look at the Yellen, Obama, Biden admin along with Euro Davos, then there could be good reasons why they would want to force the U.S. into a default. The Republicans, conservative Republicans, could be playing into that hand by also trying to stick tight, and that's why Biden's like, no deal, right? No deal. We're not going to. How dare we go back to 2022 spending levels? That would be horrible.
I know the country would collapse overnight.
I mean, 2022 was just such a horrible year. I can't imagine staying at that spending level. That'd be insane. And potentially.
I know it's their arguments are so unbelievably weak. It's laughable. Like it was like when Rand Paul, I think it was Rand Paul, said, "Hey, in 2020, he said, hey, why don't we just go back to the 2018 budget? How about we chop a penny, 1 penny out of every dollar that we have apportioned to everyone? Can you live with 1% less money?" And they couldn't. They wouldn't even do that. And like when you say things like that and you see stuff like that and you know full well that they can do it and they refuse to do it, you know that this is because this is their preferred policy, which is it would be bad for them. They're trying to destroy us. They are vandals. They are not incompetent. There's a reason why Dianne Feinstein is still in Congress, even though
did you see that?
I saw that this morning, and it was worse than I imagined it was.
Way worse.
Yeah, and so you think to yourself, like, why is this like this? And it's because they don't have a good replacement for her. They need her seniority on the committees that she's on to block any reform. This is all a desperation play. Every bit of this is just more and more and more desperation. When I go back to the Build Back Better, debt ceiling raise fight of 2021, the Republicans won. The Fed won. The Fed wanted a clean raise because Pelosi was trying to tie Build Back Better and the infrastructure bill to the debt ceiling, and she lost. One of the most powerful speakers of the House in the history of the United States lost the most consequential vote of her career. And she lost to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema standing up and going, no. And you know who was behind them for saying no? Who's more powerful than them? The New York Money Center banks. That's who. No one else, period. There's no one else who can put that kind of political pressure on those two guys, those two people, and say, we have your back, you vote no, you break Pelosi. And they broke Pelosi. And they can break Chuck Schumer. He's next. If Schumer loses this debt ceiling fight, Schumer is done as Senate Majority Leader in the Senate. The Senate will break. We could only hope. And this is it. This is the Republic right here. This is why they're arguing that they can invoke the 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling without Congress.
I think media talks about that. I haven't heard anybody from the government. Yellen
talked about it. They brought her on Face the Nation on ABC.
But she said there's no good possibilities, and we wouldn't want to do that.
Oh yeah, no. She was only asked about that in order to deny it. They set the agenda for that. You think she went into that meeting and didn't know what the questions were going to be?
Of course, yeah. She can barely talk as it is. Of course, they have to give her the questions in advance.
Well, I mean, the point being here is that, and look, Janet Yellen's running around doing foreign policy at this point, and she's no good at it. To Daniel DiMartino Booth's point, she's always, and you couldn't get her on the phone when she was Fed chair, right? She never built relationships with anyone. In a recent interview Danielle did with Blockworks, she talked about how Powell's always out there on the Hill, schmoozing with people, talking with them, building relationships, explaining Fed policy to Congress and to the staff and whatnot. He's out there all the time. He knows that in order for this to get done, he has to be able to explain what he's doing and why he's doing it. Whereas Yellen ran the Fed as an autocrat, in the same way that Bernanke ran it as an autocrat.
And I was going to say, not to give her any cover at all, but I mean, you've been in this longer than I have, but I mean, nobody seemed to really ever even know what the Fed was or talk about the Fed until Ron Paul started running in the Fed campaign.
Sure.
And today, everybody watches what the Fed is doing. I mean, 5 years ago, 10 years, nobody knew anything about it. So, I mean, nobody before Yellen was out there hobnobbing and networking, were they?
So, I mean, well, yeah, they were. I mean, every Fed chairman runs the thing differently. But the academics like Bernanke and Yellen don't know how to schmooze. And now they've got her out there like trying to do foreign policy, and she's bad at it.
Yeah, horrible.
She's terrible at it. And it's making things worse while she's trying to enforce. So her idea of conducting foreign policy is to put a price cap on Russian oil, seaborne oil.
Yeah, that worked out well.
No, it worked out terribly. Russian seaborne loadings are up 10% year over year.
Yeah. In one of the very more memorable books on me, and I've had my kids read it, is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Mm-hmm. And it's a book every high school person should read so they can learn how to get around in this world. And they talk about never. But they talk about never. I mean, it's been on the bestseller since
I know. I joke that I'm really. This is a self-criticism. I'm really brusque, rough, and rough and numble, right? That's all.
You're super well read. But the point is like never back somebody into a corner. Like always allow them like some wiggle room, because you're not going to win. You know, you're not going to win when you do that. And so anyway, when you put this cap on Russian oil, now all of a sudden we've kind of put our allies into a corner. We're like, well, Japan, India, like we need oil. Like now we're forced to go against you, right? It was not a good move. And it seems like regardless of which way this, and I don't know when we'll get this episode out, it's pretty long now. Regardless of which way this debt ceiling debate goes, the damage is kind of already done.
Well, maybe. Because look, one of the.
I mean, confidence is eroded, right?
Sure,
it's highlighted the battle, the division inside the government. It's brought attention to the fact that the bankruptcy, insolvency. I mean, so there's a lot of damage that's been done.
There has been a lot of damage done. But the other thing, Mark, a point that I've been trying to make for a long time is that nobody expected this sea change in American policy, both monetary and fiscal policy, to be an easy path, right? And so, again, I honestly believe that global capital markets are desperate for the right signal to come from the United States. Like, look, no one wants to ditch the dollar if they don't have to, as long as the dollar isn't a weaponized instrument of societal destruction. Now, I'm not saying that will end with a good resolution of this debt ceiling fight. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that it's a marker, a big marker, that something has changed on the Hill, and that the United States is beginning to commit to not only rational monetary policy, but rational fiscal policy and domestic policy, which will then spill over into eventually rational foreign policy. CNN made a huge mistake the other night giving Donald Trump 70 minutes. to
Well,
run
that's what
restaurants.
AOC thought.
What's that?
AOC certainly agreed with you on that.
No, the big tell was Rick Wilson going on an absolute, I mean, he was swearing worse than I was, and he's the Lincoln Project guy. He's the head neocon, and he was swearing worse than I do about how this was just dumb. And
How dare they give him airtime?
yeah, this was the dumbest thing you could have done. F-bomb this, F-bomb that. Dude, seriously. I mean, so it was just, he was livid because he saw just how many people, if they watched that, realize that Trump is still sharp, still on top of his game, and is still is able to control the megaphone and the microphone when he has control of it. And the media can't shut him up, no matter how much they try. And,
he was pretty good.
And when he said, "Look, I'll get Putin and Zelensky in a room together. We'll have this war done in 24 hours."
I mean, there was a couple of things. One, he pulled out the receipts. He's like, "Hang on, listen, let me fact check this in real time." It's pretty
great.
good. But then to your point, he dodged the question: who do you want to see win, Russia or Ukraine? He's like,
he dodged the question because it doesn't matter at this point who wins.
there is no winning. There's no winning.
Right.
Nobody wins an argument, right? We just want it to be in over.
She tried to turn it into a struggle session, and she failed. She wanted him to go rah Slava Ukraini, and he said, "I'm Donald Trump. I don't have to do that.
I got us. I'm
going to end the war, which is more important."
Yeah. All right. Now, maybe the last section we'll talk about here is. We've continued to talk about these warring factions globally, and now we've kind of dove down all the way into like the inner workings of the government. You framed it up very well with the Fed and inner workings there. And obviously with some of the Republicans, Democrats. I mean, I hate to get partisan on these topics because they both want to print a bunch of money. One wants to print more than the next one, but whatever. And while there may be a few good people there, at the end of the day, I view them all as authoritarians. Even Ron DeSantis, who I think is doing a great job and sometimes makes me want to move to Florida to support him. I mean, he's kind of an authoritarian as well.
Of course he is.
And I know you're, I know you're an Austrian and somewhat of libertarian, so I'm sure you maybe kind of share that.
But I love Ron DeSantis as a governor. I don't know that I like him as president, but as a governor, he's the best governor we've ever had.
Yeah,
I've been living in Florida 36 years now. 37, almost 37 years. It'll be 37 years in August. Ain't nothing like what we've ever seen in Florida. And that guy, if necessary, will take us out of the country if necessary. And I don't want to go there. I don't want to get into that conversation today, really.
Yeah,
because I think it's let's get past the debt ceiling. Let's get into 2024, and then we'll start bringing that conversation up again. Because I think it'll be more germane then. We'll have a clearer view of the playing field.
I didn't want to dive into that conversation either. My point was just, I hate to get this partisan when we're talking about the Republicans and the rhinos and the conservatives, but there is a little bit of a power struggle. But if we dive in deeper, keeping this kind of framework in mind, so then we can kind of see things that are happening. And it was a brilliant conversation that you had with Caitlin Long, talking about kind of like this war against technology and innovation. And really, I remember years ago, I've been in crypto and Bitcoin now for, I think, 7-8 years, whatever, 2015. And I remember Christine Lagarde making a comment saying that financial innovation is innovation is a threat to our financial stability.
Yes.
Which, of course, right? That's creative destruction. That's what happens.
Right. And she's like, and she's such an authoritarian that her muscles twitch.
Yeah. So we have this massive push to shut down almost all technology. And so Gary Gensler has been on the war path on crypto, but without clearly laying out any rules for anybody. Obviously, Elizabeth Warren literally is running on a campaign anti-crypto. Like, I've never seen, and I asked ChatGPT if they could tell me, has there ever been anyone run a campaign on taking away freedoms? It seemed pretty weird to me that she's going to run on an anti-crypto. Like, who? Wait.
Well, because she's as Davos as they get. So was Gensler.
And then Gensler and Brad Sherman the other day, he's coming out. He's out of the crypto bros. Only the U.S. government prints money out of thin air, which shows how much he doesn't understand. That's like saying Mark Zuckerberg printed money out of thin air because he wrote code. Anyway, I don't want to dive into that rabbit, but we clearly see these players, right, that are like going way overboard. But then we have Gary Gensler was brought before a committee, and he was, he got rammed. They were like, was it Patrick McHenry, I think, right? He said He said, you haven't been clear with your regulations. He's like, well, I think we have been very clear. He said, great. If you've been clear, then is Ethereum a security? Oh, well, I can't answer this. So it's like,
Exactly.
Obviously, you're not clear, right? And then I think maybe it was Senator Kennedy who's been great, ramming him, and he said, you're pushing all of this into the hands of China and blah, blah, blah. Now there's, this movement to call for his resignation. So we see this fight, right, where on one hand, they're coming in super heavy just to get rid of everything and anything. But then there's like this other faction that seems to be kind of fighting back. And I do just want to say one more thing before I let you respond to this, because it's not just the SEC and crypto.
Right.
In my opinion, it's technology overall, and so I want to point to the Restrict Act, which has, I believe, 25 co-sponsors, more Republicans, 13 Republicans, 11 Democrats, 1 independent on this bill. Even Manchin is on this bill.
Yep.
And, this is the most dangerous piece of legislation I've ever seen. And it basically gives the government full power to take any piece of technology they don't like and make it illegal, 20 years in prison. You don't even get that on second-degree murder.
Right.
This is more restrictive than China. So there's an obvious war on technology, innovation, and then there's like this division. Is that also something that you see? I guess my question is, Is this like a last-ditch effort every empire goes through, which is capital controls to try to control that?
Yeah.
And then you have this division, a warring faction inside that?
Yeah, I absolutely think that that's part of this, a big thing. The Restrict Act is very, very dangerous. And again, everything in the form of national security, because remember, at the end, late-stage empires become maximally paranoid, right? Again, you can say the same thing about China. Right.
Well, they have to because they're so corrupt.
Exactly. It was the same thing with the CCP. They're freaking corrupt, and they're becoming maximally paranoid, right? Yeah. So, and in some ways, the Russians, I think, are actually just kind of catching up to the Wild West, where there was no regulation. It was completely corrupt in a private sense, at the local government level. And I think just remember that Putin's actually trying to ride herd and get rid of a lot of the administrative corruption that exists. And I know Russia really, really well from this perspective, and it can look to an outsider like he's becoming, rampantly authoritarian. When really what he's doing is just trying to get Russia back to something the regulations like the United States in the 1950s. Because that's how
kind of like what Bukele had to do in El Salvador.
Yeah,
it's a very authoritarian move, but he kind of had to.
Yeah, at least to run roughshod over things, and then allow the because what's happening in Russia is that the culture is returning to Russia, as opposed to being destroyed here in the United States, right? Mm-hmm. So the kids are taking the parents to church in Russia, as opposed to, and that's the big thing. And whether I don't want to get into whether Putin uses the Orthodox Church as a weapon or not, which he does, but clearly,
back to the war on tech and capital controls in the US.
But the war on technology here in the United States is very, very clear. It's very Davos driven because they want to have control over every aspect of the megaphone, right? This is what they want. They're still smarting from the black eye of Elon Musk buying Twitter, and they're still trying to get control of Twitter again, and that's why they got rid of Tucker Carlson last week. It was a feature, not a bug. These things are all there, and they are moving. Clearly, they want to move. Into a war footing, and they want to have complete control over all pipes. Remember, in the Davos world, and I have this on good authority. Martin Armstrong's talked about this tremendously. He's like, I've met Klaus Schwab. I know how the WEF is run. He runs it like it's his personal fiefdom. There is no arguments within the WEF. They do what Schwab tells them to do. He literally is like the Fuhrer in that organization. And he believes in complete and total and utter control. And so his minions at the middle layers below him, that's their job, is to implement that control. And when you see extreme bits like this, of moments of attempts to regain control over that which they're losing control over, right? You have to see those things as a sign of weakness, not strength. They're not acting from a position of strength. If they had everything under control, they wouldn't have to do these things. And so understand that every time they escalate further, so this is now another, they're going nuclear on technology. The way they went nuclear over, over Alex Jones, every time they go nuclear. And when you go nuclear and you threaten the nuclear option, you better follow through with the nuclear option or it fails. They went nuclear on Russian sanctions. You better kill Russia and prove to the world that these sanctions will kill Russia or you will lose the rest of the world, which is why you and I are having this conversation today, because those sanctions failed.
Yeah. Back to your scientist, physicist, right? Each action has an equal and opposite reaction. And so the more they get desperate and try to squeeze, the more people push back. And the more people push back, the more they have to squeeze, and then on and on and on. Right?
We're a week away from Star Wars Day, and the day they put Carrie Fisher on the friggin' Hollywood Walk of Fame, right? The more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. Like these are important ideas, and we have to remember that we're being gaslit by morons. This is my new theme. If you want to title this episode, Mark, here's your title. We are being gaslit by morons. Stop it. Stop being gaslit by morons. They're not that smart. They're just powerful. But
unfortunately, they're powerful.
You can erode their power by refusing to believe they're gaslighting and acting again the way acting counter to them. So to your point, you invoked Newton. And we understand Newtonian physics because we live in a kind of Newtonian, our frame of reference is very Newtonian. Now, my research director as an undergraduate, when trying to explain quantum mechanics to us undergraduates, came in one day and he said, look, I know this quantum mechanics stuff is hard because we don't play quantum baseball. We play Newtonian baseball. We can map the vectors and it's all this, but we live in a quantum universe. And people act more like electrons than they do baseballs, okay? And what I mean by that is when you understand what Heisenberg's uncertainty principle teaches you is that the act of observing a system alters the system. Once you fix an electron's position, you don't know its momentum, and if you know its momentum, you don't know where it is, right? And because of that, and that is to say, once you observe something happening, it obviates all these other options, right? So humans do not like to be surveilled. They alter their behavior once they know they're being surveilled, because it's a survival technique. Surveillance is a threat, and we will alter our behavior. And that behavior, as much as they think they've modeled our responses in any kind of statistical sense, they have no idea what we're going to do. They think they know what they're going to do. They think they've got us to one standard deviation of, okay, if we just legislate within one standard deviation of the potential responses, we'll get enough people that that the outliers won't matter. But it's the outliers that lead the revolutions. They're the outliers that build the innovation, all the things that they complain about. And it's the outliers that make the enforcement of the rules too expensive for them to maintain. So again, raise interest rates, cut the freaking balance sheets down, take away the money, take away the freaking leverage, and you take away their power.
Yeah.
Done.
Which is the main theme of Bitcoiners. Take away the money printer, the source of their power.
And it's also exactly what Jerome Powell is doing. And while it will delay, if he's successful, delay the Bitcoin revolution, it will actually help create the Bitcoin revolution. Because the Fed will eventually have to come onto Bitcoin's side to survive. As we move the system from its current maximally corrupt state to a less corrupt state towards the next state. And that's only if we ask for it, and not only ask for it, but demand it. So do we demand it? Yes. Do we have the technology and the tools now? Yes, we do. Now all we have to do is suffer the slings and arrows of their responses to us as cornered animals. And they are cornered animals.
That right there could be a whole show in itself. There's a lot to dig into in that point, and it's one that we kind of argued in the UnCommunist Manifesto, and it kind of goes back to this idea of Marxism, of that and of that there's really the Keynesians, the Marxists, they have this big misunderstanding of the world and human nature. And they realize, or they fail to realize that human nature wants to be free and wants to have our own ideas. And so, what is it? Yuval Harari from the World Economic Forum talks about taking away free will. Well, I believe God gave us free will. You can't just take that away, right? And so we're always going to have that. And so while the Keynesians want to kind of manage us as ones and zeros on a spreadsheet, like that's just not how it works. And it's very interesting. I kind of came across this idea partly due to a book called The Revolt of the Public. I don't know if you've seen that book. And it basically talks about how, which I've talked about as well, but technology always changes the way that we communicate and organize. And so the Protestant Reformation proliferated Bibles, and then it kind of broke the centralization, moved to decentralization. And now that we have the internet, it's kind of doing the same thing, right? And what if you look at, and I have this 3-cycle thesis I've talked about, and like this pendulum swings back and forth from centralization to decentralization. So you had the Protestant Reformation lead to decentralization. The 250 years later, Industrial Revolution led back to centralization. So it led to us all being centralized, not just in the U.S., but in Chicago, New York, right? And we had these big corporations, and the Henry Ford was a technological revolution, created not just the automobile, but the assembly line. And the assembly line then, basically you had to create a management system to manage the masses as a cog on a wheel. So you're way smarter than me, but both of us on the assembly line together do the exact same job. And so you created a management system to manage the masses all as cogs in a wheel. And then because of that, we created a government structure to govern like we had the management structure. So the government was a massive top-down central authority managing everyone as a cog on a wheel. Today, with the internet, now we've all gone into our own corners of the interwebs, and we all have these different ideas, more ideas. When we grew up as kids, we all listened to the same music, watched the same movies, etc. Today, we're all different, and so we're more different than we've ever been. And so the version of government we have today is no longer compatible.
No, absolutely, it's not.
And you can't do that.
And it's interesting. I was at my Wednesday board gaming group 2 days ago, and was listening to, and most of the people there, the people I was playing with, they're all millennials, so in their early to mid 30s, and they were talking about going to see bands that I'd never even heard of. Right. And half of the bands that I listen to now don't even. Well, some of them are dead, some of them are disbanded, blah blah blah. R.I.P. Neil Peart, yada yada yada. So yeah, no, exactly that, and like and to that point that, and it's the same thing with media, like, we're doing this show. As much as they try to take us off the air, you can't. I hate to invoke anything written by Joss Whedon, but you can't stop the signal.
You can't stop the signal.
You can't stop the signal, and it's that simple, because we refuse to be. Baseballs. We are still electrons. And at the end of the day, we can dig our heels in and say no. And
that's what they're afraid of. You mentioned Alex Jones earlier. They killed him. They wiped him off the face of the earth, but he's bigger than he ever was on his own personal website.
Exactly.
And through the power, and now today,
Obi-Wan Ben Alex, right? I mean,
yeah. Now they've deplatformed Tucker, but he'll probably be bigger on his own than he was with them.
Oh
right?
no, I mean, Tucker Carlson could do a show for free on Twitter for the next 18 months while Fox tries to drag out the breach of contract negotiations through the courts and everything else, and Tucker will still be building equity for himself for a bigger platform post January 2025, even if he just throws the next 18 months in as a loss leader and just self-produces the show at a loss and just keeps taking the tax loss for the next 18 months. How much could it cost him to run a show? I was thinking about this the other day. How much could it cost him to really run his show?
Well, you run a show, so you know.
Well, no, I mean, I don't. I mean, it doesn't cost me anything, but it's just me. If Tucker Carlson would have to hire hire his writing staff and hire a couple of researchers and a director and a producer and yada 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 and do all of it, and it probably costs him a couple $1 million a year. In salaries and stuff. I mean, as far as the infrastructure is concerned, he's already got a He's already got a studio. He's got it in his home. All he needs is the dozen people, half a dozen to a dozen people to manage the whole thing, and he could just pay that out of pocket. It's not like Tucker doesn't have the money. He could pay that out of the interest. $20 million a year he could pay that out of the interest out of his trust fund, for Christ's sake. It's like he's got it. They can't stop him.
Yeah.
So.
And the value for value model that's developed now, because, if I can be on the internet, they can't shut that down, and I could just accept Bitcoin. Think about it on a value for value model, right? Joe Rogan gets 200 million views a month.
Yeah.
If everybody gave him 50 cents, that's $100 million a month, right? And so Tucker Carlson, same thing. If everybody, you have a Patreon, so you kind of get it. But think about it. If everyone just gave Tucker 50 cents for watching an episode, micropayment, that's hundreds of millions of dollars a month he'd be making.
That's right. That's why the fountain model for podcasting is so very powerful, right? Yeah. My show's on Fountain, and I believe in the value for value thing. I don't make a big deal out of it, but it's there.
One more question for you, Tom, and then we're going to wrap this up because we've gone super long. I appreciate you taking the time. It's been a fascinating conversation. I always enjoyed talking to you. And if everyone likes this conversation, then you should go follow Tom because you get a lot more of it. One more question. So Obama, Biden, Yellen, Euro, Davos, etc. It looks like, if you kind of believe this kind of narrative that we're kind of talking about, if the media is kind of in on this, mainstream media anyway, right? When you start to see stuff coming in media, like, why do they want us to think that? And it looks like things are starting to turn against Biden. The Biden crime family's out, 150 plus SARS reports. We have his domestic policy advisor stepping down. Do you think things are starting to turn against him? Maybe they didn't want him to rerun again, and now he is. They have to take him down. Or do you think this is just a little bit of right-wing media that's kind of bringing a little smoke, and it probably just kind of fizzles out?
I actually think this is more of the counter-revolution argument. I think this is very sincere, that they're saying, okay, you're going to go after I hate to do this. You're going to go after Uncle Jamie for Epstein? Okay, well then, by the way, our people in the DOJ and our people in, in Congress, blah, 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 we have a stack of manila folders on them too. See, why did Elon Musk buy Twitter?
He says for free speech. I think ultimately is more of like trying to build a WeChat, but that's a whole different conversation.
I disagree with both of those things. I think that's the long term. I think the main reason why he bought Twitter when he bought Twitter was to get access to the DM database. And that's compromat. That's compromat. That is, full well who was putting their thumb, using Twitter to put their thumb on the scale of public perception, and how many people are actually guilty, and they've got them dead to rights for treason. That's why he bought Twitter. And I don't think that Musk bought Twitter. I think Musk bought Twitter, but Musk bought Twitter with a bunch of other people who were aligned with him to say, yeah, nominally it's about free speech and all of that stuff. Again, that's the headline. What's the real reason they bought Twitter? Because he bought that thing. He went from, we're going to tie it up in court forever and a day and blah, 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 and I don't want to pay this much money for it. And then all of a sudden he was like, nope, buying it by Friday. Because somebody came in and said, look, we'll just give you the $20 billion in equity. Don't worry about it. Just buy it. Because we need that information now. And we're going to need it for the second half of Biden's administration, because we're going to need it to get rid of these people and to neuter them all before they take us to World War III. That's the way I think, Mark. That's my entire life. And everything else is, here's some stock picks. At this point, it doesn't really matter what the stock picks are. I mean, they're, just getting to these, the sector stories are easy at that point. Teach people how to fish. And then
what I'm looking for is a big storm in the South Pacific down in Fiji. And I want to see a storm where the waves get to 50, 60 feet. And then I know that if they get to 50, 60 feet, it's going to send a good swell my direction. And then I have to see, well, which direction is it going? Okay, it's going to be really good in El Salvador. It's going to be really good in Mexico. It's going to be really good in California, right? And then you ride those waves. And so kind of what we're looking at is this storm. And then you look at which way is it going to send the sectors, right? Which way is it going to send the money to? And then we just go and we just pick stocks in those sectors.
Yeah, exactly. Start in highly politicized. One of these days, I'd really like to actually get back to picking stocks based on their fundamentals and their balance sheet, and and is Coke going to outperform Pepsi or blah 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 blah. But we live in highly politicized markets. So maximally politicized markets, you have to be looking at politics. Yeah. That's what you need to be doing. And then sector, and then you just do sector analysis at that point, and then go and find a good story within that sector, and go, yeah, that one looks good. Hey, and the valuation even doesn't suck, and the chart looks pretty good too. Why don't we buy that one? And I have patrons come back to me all the time, but why are we in this stock as opposed to that one? This is a clearly better stock, and I go, It is, but I'm not going to change the one that's in my portfolio. I'm just going to go, you should buy that one too, and I'll give you a free chart read as to where I think your buy point is going to be. And I do this for patrons, twice a week, and and it's very valuable, actionable information for them, while also teaching them how to read a chart so they can make those decisions on their own, and what to look for in a balance sheet, what to look for in earnings reports and research reports and the news flow surrounding that company or that thing. So it's very important.
With that, I think it's a good place to end. We've gone 2 hours, man, Tom. I think this might actually be the longest interview I've done to date, and I've done a bunch of them. So appreciate you taking the time. You're so generous. Like I said, if everybody likes this conversation, then you should definitely check out Tom's stuff. We'll make sure to link to that down below. Anything else you want to say, Tom? You said it all.
No, I think we're good. I think maybe the last thing to really think about is that you have more power than you think you do, and just remember that at the end of the day, they're gaslighting you because they're worried, and they're going to look like, and they're never going to apologize for what they've done. They're never going to back off of what they've done, and they only know to continue to push on whatever front that they're pushing on. They're going to keep pushing that way, and eventually you're just going to have to say, you know what? No, it's time for you to go. It's time for you to leave the stage and be done with it. We're done with you now. We're moving on, and we as a species need to realize that that's where we're headed, and it's going to cost us something, and it's not going to be easy to get out of this, but we can do it. And if we don't do it, then we take the consequences, and we leave those consequences for our children. And as far as I'm concerned, that's why I do this. I get, every day I get up and I'm like, okay, how am I going to make this a slightly better world for my daughter so I don't have to apologize to her every day for the world I'm leaving her?
I love that. That's my why as well. There's a quote from Thomas Paine: "If there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace."
Oh, that guy is fantastic. So thank you, Mark. I really appreciate the time and everything else, and the opportunity as always.
Thanks,
It's always great to talk to you.
All right, that's a wrap. Hopefully you enjoyed this conversation with Tom as much as I enjoyed having it. As we kind of left it at the end, the power lies in our hands. Through our consent, they have the power. Don't feel hopeless. Don't feel helpless. We have the power. Take this. Discuss it with your friends, family, coworkers. Share it with people who you think need it, because we need to continue to get these ideas out there. As always, please leave me a comment. Leave me a thumbs up if you like it. Thumbs down if you don't, but leave me a comment. Tell me why. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And that's what I got. To your success. I'm out.